Welcome to 21st Sports recap and reaction for the Dallas Cowboys at the Miami Dolphins in their Week 11 matchup played November 22nd, 2015. We're going to go over the scores and the stats and give our breakdown and analysis. And Tony Romo was finally back under center after having missed 7 games, all of which the Cowboys had lost after starting 2-0. And of course, the rains were falling pretty heavy down in Miami, but they got this game going regardless because they play football in the rain, sleet, and in the snow. But in this game, in the first quarter, the Cowboys actually were driving and they were in scoring range, but Romo was intercepted by Brent Grimes, and now the Dolphins would take over, but then Rolando McClain would intercept Ryan Tannehill, and it was a pick six, a 12-yard defensive touchdown on the interception return, and with the extra point by Dan Bailey, it was 7-0 Cowboys, just 5 seconds into the second quarter. So the interception by Romo ended up turning into 7 points for the Cowboys as their defense comes right back with a pick six. And of course, on that interception, Romo was hit, and that kind of affected the pass. So it wasn't quite exactly Romo's fault. He actually would end up throwing another interception later on. That was also not really something that was his fault, but that was in the second half. But in the second quarter, with about a minute left before halftime, Romo connected with Terrence Williams for a 31-yard touchdown. Bailey added the extra point, and it was now 14-0 Cowboys. And that was a result of an 8.5-minute drive. And that was actually 93 yards as they had started off on their own 7-yard line on that one. But then the Miami Dolphins, with just over a minute left before halftime, would end up going 54 yards in less than a minute, as they got good field position from their special teams, and Ryan Tannehill connected with Jordan Cameron for a 12-yard touchdown pass. Franks added the extra point, and now it was 14-7 as the Dolphins got on the scoreboard for the first time in this game to cut the Cowboys' lead to 1 score. And that was with about 16 seconds left in the first half. So that was the score at halftime. Then in the third quarter, on the first possession of the third quarter of the second half, the Cowboys would get the ball first, and Romo was intercepted for the second time, this time by Hewitt. And I really didn't think it was Romo's fault on that one either, the way the play went down. But anyway, the Dolphins were not able to turn that into points as they ended up punting after 4 plays. The Cowboys went 3 and out, and now the Dolphins had the ball back, and they would end up scoring on this possession as they ended up with a 29-yard touchdown, Tannehill to Kenny Stills. And that would tie the game up at 14 apiece once Franks added the extra point with about 5.5 minutes still left in the third quarter. So now the Dolphins would take over, and they would bring the third quarter to a close. They would open up the fourth quarter with 2nd and goal on the 16, and Tony Romo found Dez Bryant for the 16-yard touchdown. Bailey added the extra point, and it was 21-14. Dallas back in the lead by 7. So now the Cowboys defense would come up big on the next possession as they actually shut down the Dolphins, forcing a 3 and out. And of course, they ended up with the ball backed up against their own end zone, but they would have to punt the ball from their own 5-yard line, and now the Dolphins would take over after they ended up with, there was a penalty for unnecessary roughness on the punt and an 18-yard return by Whitehead. And with that combination, the Cowboys now took over in Miami territory on the 21, and then they ended up not getting into the end zone as Romo was sacked on 3rd and goal from the 7 by Shelby, but out came Dan Bailey to kick a 30-yard field goal, and that made it 24-14 as the Cowboys extended their lead to 10 points. This with about 9 minutes left in the game. So now the Dolphins would take over, but they ended up punting after 4 plays as Crawford came up with a big sack on Tannehill on 2nd and 6 that forced 3rd and 17. They didn't pick up the first down, so they would punt the ball back to the Cowboys. They took over with about 6.5 minutes left in this game, and they would not score on this possession, but they ate up 5.5 minutes of clock before turning the ball over on downs. They actually elected to run the ball on 4th and 11 from the Miami 36, but they did this as a means of running out the clock as far as they could, and being up by 2 scores with just over a minute left to play, they were able to do that. And so on the next play from scrimmage, Tannehill was sacked by Greg Hardy and by Irvin as they combined for the sack, and they dropped Tannehill for a 15-yard loss. And this game would end up coming to an end with a sack by Lawrence 3 plays later. So the Cowboys defense coming up big, and Tony Romo wins in his return. It's his 10th straight road win in his career, dating back to last year. And so now the Cowboys are 3-7 on the season, 2-3 on the road. The Dolphins now drop to 4-6. They're 1-3 at home in Miami on the season. So the Cowboys, with this win, they're not quite done yet. They're only 2 games out of first place in the NFC East as they trail the Giants by 2 games, and the Redskins and the Eagles are 1 game ahead of the Cowboys, and that's with 6 games left to play. So they could make up that ground. Of course, it's not going to be easy with their remaining schedule, but they are still technically alive, and 2 games is not too much to overcome when you have 6 games to do it in, and especially with the way that the teams in the NFC East have been playing thus far. No team is above 500, and the Giants right now at 500 are in first place. So the Cowboys, it's possible. If they could afford to even lose to the Panthers next week, but if they can win out after that, 8-8 might win the East. It could win the East. It's not over yet, especially with Romo back, as Romo made quite the gutsy performance in this game. Even earlier on, it looked like he was going to be dropped for a safety, but he ended up making a pass with his left hand, although he is not left-handed. But Romo, very gutsy performance in this game. He was 18 for 28, 227 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Darren McFadden having a monster game, 29 carries for 129 yards. McFadden also had 3 catches for 20 yards, giving him 149 total yards on the game. And Turbin ended up with 7 carries for 35 yards. That's 5 yards per carry, as he did pretty good in a limited role, as he definitely shows some promise. He also had a catch for 3 yards as well. Terrence Williams had 4 receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown, and Dez Bryant had 4 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. Jason Witten, 2 receptions for 27 yards, and Gavin Escobar, 2 receptions for 20 yards. And for the Dolphins, Ryan Tannehill, 13 of 24, 188 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. Lamar Miller, 7 carries for 44 yards. He also had 2 receptions for 11 yards, giving him 55 total yards in the game. Jarvis Landry, 4 receptions for 66 yards. Kenny Stills, 2 receptions for 52 yards. Jordan Cameron, 2 receptions for 21 yards and a touchdown. And for the kickers, Dan Bailey, 1 for 1 on the field goals, 3 for 3 on the extra points. And Andrew Franks, 2 for 2 on the extra points, did not attempt a field goal. And for the defense, for the Cowboys, Crawford had a sack, as did Lawrence, and Hardy and Irving combined for a sack, as they each had a half sack. And Rolando McClain with that interception, that pick 6, as he scored the game's first points. Brent Grimes also had an interception. That was for Miami, and Hewitt had one as well, as they had 2 picks in the game. And Olivier Vernon and Shelby each had sacks for the Dolphins. We look at team stats, 22 first downs for the Cowboys, and they had some good balance on their offenses. 10 of those first downs were on the ground, 11 through the air, as they had more rushing and more passing yards individually, or first downs individually, than the Dolphins had combined first downs, as they only had 9 first downs in this game. And the Cowboys were 7 of 14 on third down. That's 50%. They also went for it once on fourth down. They did, or twice on fourth down rather, converting once for 50% on fourth down as well. Whereas for the Dolphins, they only converted 1 third down out of 10, just 10% conversion rate. They went for it once on fourth down and did not convert And for the Dallas Cowboys, they had 386 net yards total. The Dolphins just 210. Through the air, the Cowboys had 220 netted as Romo was sacked twice, losing 7 yards. And the Dolphins had 140 net yards through the air as Tannehill was sacked 3 times, losing 48 yards. And on the ground, the Cowboys netted 166 yards. And on the ground for the Dolphins, they netted just 70 yards. Although the Dolphins actually averaged more yards per rushing play, averaging 5 yards per rushing play. And the Cowboys averaging 4.4 yards per rushing play. We look at the penalties, so a lot of penalties in this game. 10 penalties against the Cowboys, 79 penalty yards, 9 penalties against the Dolphins, 74 penalty yards. 1 fumble in the game, that was by Miami, but they did not lose that fumble. And we look at the red zone. In the red zone, the Cowboys just 1 for 3, 33%. And for the Dolphins, they were actually 1 for 1 in the red zone, but they only made 1 trip to the red zone. They were 100% though. And the time of possession was a big factor in this game. And it was 38 minutes and 50 seconds for the Cowboys, 21 minutes and 10 seconds for the Dolphins, as they were really eating up the time on the clock with the ground game, getting a lot of production out of the ground game. As Darren McFadden, they kept feeding him the rock, and he was definitely getting the job done. Sid Turbin also was doing a good job in limited role. But the Cowboys, they get a big win on the road. Romo is back, and he definitely had a gutsy performance in this game, and is very promising for the Cowboys to see Romo out there doing his thing, as he was able to lead the Cowboys to victory. They scored 10 points in that fourth quarter, going into the quarter tied up at 14. So let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoyed all the sports.